Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson. I'm going to StokerCon 2026 if it kills me, everybody. I joined the Horror Writers Association finally, officially, earlier this year, and yesterday had the panicked moment of the hotel reservation link not quite working for me and wondering if this was all going to be just a big boondoggle. Amazing, and we get into it in our interview because we're talking about the end of the world as we know it, but we're also talking about The Stand, which is Brian's favorite book, Christopher's favorite book, and I think still my favorite book. So we have a great time digging deep into The Stand and its impact and its influence. So hope you enjoy that. For now, though, I did want to recommend a book to you all. I have been reading John Langan's new collection. It's called Lost in the Dark and Other Excursions. It's out now from Word Horde, which is a great small press. If you want to go support a small press, you should buy this book. It is a lot of classic Langan stuff. There's amazing nautical horror in it. There's a story that riffs on Heart of Darkness and Peter Pan at the same time, which is incredible. The title story, Lost in the Dark, which has been previously published, like most of these stories, is about a found footage horror movie gone wrong and strange. There's a story that's entirely told in footnotes to an article that we never get to read. It's great stuff. I highly recommend picking up any John Langan book, but especially right now because it's the newest, Lost in the Dark and Other Excursions. But that is enough of me rambling. We have got a big, awesome interview with two guests for you this week. So let's head over there right now to our chat with Christopher Golden and Brian Keene. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is our first ever duo. We have two guests this week. They are both celebrated horror writers, comic book writers, editors, podcasters. Together, they co-edited the new anthology, The End of the World as We Know It, New Tales of Stephen King's The Stand, which is available August 19th, wherever you get your books. Christopher Golden and Brian Keene, welcome to the show.
Hey.
Yeah, excited.
Well, I'm excited to have you both here. This is a mammoth anthology. I think it's 34 stories. Is that right?
It's 34 stories by 36 authors.
34 stories, 36 authors, a foreword by Chris, an afterword by Brian, an introduction by Stephen King, and all of this based on everything I've read and what Chris told me the last time he was on the show, because you had an idea and you thought that Stephen King would say no. Is that basically how it started?
We were sure that Steve would say no, but we had to ask him anyway. And I think he almost, I think his initial reaction, Brian, he has said that his initial response was going to be a no. And then somehow he had second thoughts and decided to go along with it.
Right. I mean, there's a responsibility that comes with being able to, have the ability to reach out and directly contact him. And that is, you use it wisely. You don't bother him with nonsense. you don't constantly pitch him things. But this is one, like Chris said, we were sure he'd say no, but it was we had to try. This was the one time we had to say, hey, can we bother you with this nonsense idea we have?
Yeah. And I think, honestly, Matthew, Brian and I have said this to each other recently, which is that I really believe that if either one of us individually had approached him rather than approaching him together, he would have been much more likely to say no. But my thought is that it might have struck him as sort of a generational moment. Brian and I are the same age, barring 2 months or something, Brian, and
1 month.
1 month, and so I feel like we basically said, we have in common the fact that The Stand has been our favorite novel for both of us since we were 12 or 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And they would mean the world to us to be able to do this. And I think that it was the combo that he recognized. Obviously it was a fanboy's dream, but it wasn't just that. Anyway, so that's my suspicion. And anyway, so we were thrilled because the response we ended up getting back was just all capital letters, ! Do it. That's it. That was the response.
Oh.
It is a generational moment, I think. And in readers who are curious, you can read King's whole thought process for why he said yes to this in the introduction to the book. And I also think, obviously we're 5 years into the COVID era of our world. So that was definitely a part of it. And it still seems fresh on everyone's mind. I know for both of you, you have essentially the same story, which is I found The Stand paperback when I was 13 and read it, and it became my favorite book ever. And my story is very similar. Like I picked up the complete uncut edition hardcover at a used bookstore when I was 15, and it's been my favorite book for almost 25 years, I guess would be the timeline there. What do you, I want to just talk about that initial experience of picking it up, because I have the very clear memory in my head of opening that hardcover, and it was just so massive. It was the biggest book I'd ever held up to that point, apart from, family Bibles or something. And it had that dedication, which is the book is dedicated to his wife Tabby, and it says, "For Tabby, this dark chest of wonders." And I'd never heard a book referred to that way before I'd even really opened it, and I just went, "Wow, what am I about to experience?" So I want to ask both of you, what do you remember just emotionally and just emotionally about your first experience reading The Stand?
For me, I guess it was my third King. I started with Night Shift, then Salem's Lot, then The Stand. And that was the original before the uncut came out. I was immediately struck by Stu and his buddies there in Arnett. I knew those guys. Stu was my father. His buddies were all the guys my dad worked with at the paper mill. Instead of the gas station, they hung out at the newsstand. They had those same type of conversations. And that was something that up until that point, I hadn't seen. I'd read Marvel Comics, which all took place in New York City, or the Hardy Boys, or, Lord of the Rings taking place in Middle-earth. Here were people I recognized. And with that, Larry Underwood. I didn't always have the best relationship with my parents. It's much better now, but as a kid, I was constantly under the conception that I probably wasn't a good kid, that there was something in me like biting on tinfoil, to quote Larry's mother. and even though Larry, the character, was an adult, man, that was the first time any time in fiction where I was like, I know this character. I can identify with what this character's feeling. It was an important part of my childhood, but it was also an important part of that path to becoming a writer.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because you can really go through so many of the characters and talk about the things that you connect with the most. As far as my first experience with it, I found the book in an airport bookstore, and I picked it up, and I think I saw the cover and it was the original paperback, the black
Mhm.
cover with the raven or the crow and um, and there was just magic in it for me. So I knew I wanted to read it, and it wasn't my first King. I don't remember. I've said before. I think Brian, it might have been my third as well. It might have been the same Night Shift, Salem's Lot, The Stand. But one thing that happened for me is that the book opens with Franny sitting at the end of the sort of like promontory in Algonquin, Maine, which is the beach that I've been going to with my family since I was 5 years old. So for me, I immediately had a sense of place. I immediately had a sense of familiarity. Um, I will say that it wasn't exactly right even then, the description, but the sense of it was so familiar to me, and so all of these things unfolding in that regard was great. And I also will say that I think that I didn't have the kind of, like, my father was nothing like Hap and his friends, Stu and his friends. But at the age of 12, I started working in my uncle's liquor store. And the guys who worked there had that kind of easy coworker camaraderie, give each other shit and all of that. And that was familiar. But I actually will say it's interesting, and I've been thinking more about this, Brian, since the last time we talked about it. And weirdly, I'm thrown off by having recently watched Molly Ringwald play Fran, because I don't think that she was very good. And I don't think she was Fran to me. But when I had the first experience of reading the book, I think I really connected to Fran and to Stu. That I felt like I could experience the story vicariously through each of them and both of them. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. It got under my skin in the best possible way. Yeah.
You know what's funny about doing this podcast is it unlocks certain connections in my head to these works that I never thought about before, or at least forgot that I thought about before. And this really should have smacked me right between the eyes earlier, but Stu is a blue collar guy hanging out at a gas station in Texas. My grandfather owned a gas station in a small town in Texas where my father also worked. And
Wow.
like it has not occurred to me until this moment that, like, yeah, I was probably picturing they weren't open at night, so that part wouldn't have happened, but I was probably always picturing my grandfather's gas station reading this book. Um and it's no wonder that I'm still like, yeah, Stu's my favorite character, because I click with Stu in that way, because, like, yeah, that's like my dad and his friends, the farmers that would come through uh to get their diesel every day. Um so going back to the anthology, you get the go word from Stephen King. You have his blessing. How do you possibly begin to sketch this thing out in any way? Did you just start making a list of writers you wanted? How did it begin
Well,
from that point?
I mean, sort of. There were two things happening simultaneously. One was making a list of writers, and list was originally, what, Chris, 100, 150 names.
Yeah, it was at least 100
You know,
for sure.
yeah. And then while we were winnowing that down, and well, you want to talk about Sophie's choice. Every name, I mean, no hyperbole. It's one of the toughest things I've ever done in my career. And I think Chris would concur with that.
It was very
The
good.
other thing was, no, I'm sorry. The other thing was simultaneously, we're thinking about the structure of the book. We wanted it to be epic in scale, like The Stand. We wanted an anthology that if you put the hardcover side by side with The Stand, it'd be about the same size. And we knew that, like the novel, we wanted to break it into three distinct parts. The spread of camps, migrations. Then we wanted the third part to be stories that take place after the conclusion of the novel.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think, the biggest challenge is, we had this long list. And when you're putting together an anthology, a lot of times you get sort of deeper into the list because people say no, or they can't do it, or they don't have time. But we knew going into this that there were going to be very few people who passed. And so, the difficulty was, we wanted obviously people who were in love with this book and it influenced them and was important to them in their careers, or in their the birth of their imaginations, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also, we are existing in the golden age of horror right now, and so we wanted the book also to reflect the breadth and depth of what that means. So it's sort of acolytes of The Stand on the one hand, and a representative swath of the horror writing community on the other hand, and that was the
and
challenge.
not just mainstream horror. We wanted all the subgenres and all the subsets. We wanted indie writers.
Yeah.
We wanted veterans. We wanted, up and coming, promising newcomers. Quiet horror, splatterpunk. There's even a smidge of cosmic horror in this anthology, but it's all tied in with The Stand.
We could
And
easily have done this as like a series of 5
yeah,
books.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, it is the tonal diversity in this anthology is incredible. Like, I'm looking back through the table of contents right now, and you have this, without spoiling any of the stories, you have Gabino Iglesias writing this very haunting, intimate story of survival in Puerto Rico. You have Katrina Ward writing from the point of view of animals experiencing this plague. You have a story that explores the origins of the phrase Captain Trips by Josh Mallerman.
Mm-hmm.
You have all kinds of wonderful things in here, but before we get into something else and I forget to talk about it, we have to talk about something Chris and I talked about a little when he was here last, which is the return of Poppy Z. Bright, which for me, in reading the book, because I had talked to Chris about getting that story, I was excited to read it, but I was the story exceeded my expectations in all of these wonderful ways. So what was it like for both of you to know that for the first time in 20 years, like you were going to be the guys to get the new Poppy Z. Bright story?
I mean, I was thrilled. I mean, when we were making up our list, I immediately thought, because I know how much Stephen King's work has meant to Billy Martin writes as Poppy Z. Bright.
Yes.
And his life's been immeasurably improved. But by having King's work to sink into when things are down or dark. And so I knew that, okay, wait a minute, this might be the thing. This might be something that will get Billy to write a new Poppy Bright story for the first time in so long. And so that was sort of like part of my evil plan. And I said to Brian, like, I think we can do this. And Brian was like, that would be amazing. So we went about it. So yeah, that was the story is my favorite stories. I think I told you before, my favorite Poppy novels are the liquor novels, which are not horror or weird at all. But when you get the weird stuff, this is maybe my favorite short story of Poppy's. So there's no rust on that writer.
And as a fan of the genre, I mean, Billy is not that much older than Chris and I, but Billy was getting published well before. So, thinking back as a fan, anytime I'd get one of those 90s anthologies and you got to the Poppy Z. Bright story, the back of your head got blown off. To be co-responsible with Chris to deliver that to a new generation of readers, to be the ones who made it happen, it's an honor. I mean, when I'm 80 and laying in bed looking back on my career, that's going to be one of the top 10 moments, personally.
Yeah. And the thing is, Brian, it's like, because I always would be like, it's like it's, and I know Poppy also loves, or Billy also loves Billy Joel. It's like when Billy Joel decided he wasn't going to write pop music anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always just like, but you could do it more. You could keep going. You're still here. You're still around. And so it would have been such a shame to me if Billy had never written weird shit again. And I'm so glad that we were able to do that. I will say though, Matthew, that that in addition to that story, and I know we're going to get into it more and talking about choosing the writers, that was the most fun, is to just figure out, like, Catherine Valente's story, which is called Came the Last Night of Sadness, is an extraordinary story. And Stephen King loved her story. And I was sitting at dinner with a group of people and having a chat with Kat years ago when she said, it's always been a disappointment to her that people who do horror don't think of her as somebody who writes horror, when she loves horror. And she would like to write more horror and be in horror anthologies and all this stuff. So I knew immediately, I was like, okay, I'm going to get a story from Catherine Valente. We're going to make sure she's on the list. And so Brian and I were having these conversations, and again, like, Brian's like, whoa, who needs to be in this? We got to get Brian Smith to come in and remind people what Brian Smith can do. And so those conversations are what led to this, like that Jenga puzzle of this.
Yeah. Well, and another example of that is S.A. Cosby, who is a crime writer, but the kind of crime fiction that he writes, we often as readers tend to lean him toward the dark stuff, which as far as I can tell, he embraces. And to see him writing in this mode was wonderful, because it feels like an S.A. Cosby story. It has the same voice that you get from Razorblade Tears and all the Centers Bleed and all that, but it is 100% like, oh no, I'm playing in this sandbox where just about anything can happen. So it's all of these great imaginations riffing on one overarching concept and mythology. And I know you said you wanted to break the book into sections, much like the novel, and you do get these very distinct chunks of, well, this is the immediate aftermath. This is the people picking their sides and moving into place, and this is the stuff that happens after that. Did you have to steer? What was the process like of working with writers? Did you have to steer anyone toward any specific place? Did you just kind of let them spit out drafts and then refine it? How did that work?
We asked them when they were invited, here's the three parts, the three sections we have. Tell us where your story is going to take place. And they did. And then after that, it was just like you said, a big old jigsaw puzzle, just figuring out what fit in where. You know, there was a lot of continuity involved. I would read the draft they had sent, see where it took place, see if that contradicted anything in the stand. Which month did it take place? What was happening in the stand that month? What's happening with the other stories the other writers are submitting, and putting it all together. Like I said, like a big puzzle. There weren't, I don't know, Chris, I think it's fair to say there wasn't a lot of steering. There were a couple things we had to point out, like, there's too many dogs. Kojak was a rarity, some things like that. I think the biggest surprise was the two stories we got that spawned a fourth section to the book.
Right, yes.
Again, without spoilers, one of those is by David J. Scow, one of my absolutely all-time favorite writers, and his is a story that, trying to think how to describe without spoilers, takes place here in our world, and studies the Stand's impact on our world. The other one is by Nat Cassidy, and Chris, you go ahead and talk about that one.
Oh God,
Well,
Nat's story broke my brain. I'm gonna have to reread that a couple dozen times.
Yeah, Nat's story. I keep saying this, but Nat's story came into the inbox. I was doing the first reads of the stories for the most part, and I read the story and I immediately texted Brian and I said, I just read Nat Cassidy's story. The balls on this guy, because I keep saying, like, to have the audacity to write the story Nat wrote without checking first if it would be okay. I just love that, because he was just like, nope, I'm doing it, and if they reject it, they reject it. And
Yep.
And then I was like, we need to run this past Steve, because I don't know that he's gonna, So it was great. I mean, it was just again, the audacity it took to write the story is huge. And it paid off for him, because I know it's going to be one of the stories. Editing anthologies is always fascinating, because when you start to see the reviews, you see, every reviewer, oh, these are my favorite stories, and the next reviewer, but I hated this one, and the next reviewer, that'll be the first one they say is one of their favorites, the one that the other person hated. And so what I love about them is it really is, the classic Forrest Gump box of chocolates, right? Something for everyone in there. But you always know there are a few stories that people are going to talk about. And Nat's story and Katrina Ward's story and Poppy Bright's story, there are a handful of stories in there I think people are going to really talk about. And yeah, so it's been great. But as far as the three sections are concerned, Brian did so much of the heavy lifting with all of that, and it's so appreciated. We nudged a couple people at a certain point. We were getting a lot of stories that were set during the events of the book, and we did nudge and say, we're getting a lot of these. If you haven't done it yet, if you're thinking about other things, and that's about it. I mean, I think, it was just exciting to get them.
Well, speaking of balls and stories, kind of audacious, ambitious stories here, like when Paul Tremblay was here a couple of weeks ago, like he spilled to me that, like, he had done essentially a Pallbearers Club, The Stand crossover.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an amazing story if you know Paul's work and go into that and go like, oh man, I'm gonna have so much fun picking this apart. And you just mentioned going to King with some stuff. How much input did he have on any of these stories? Were there any parts where he was like, well, that doesn't make sense, or let's maybe change this, or was he just very like, no, go for it, let people play?
No, he he gave us his blessing. There were a couple hard and firm rules. You couldn't use Stu or Franny or Glenn or any of the main characters. The one exception to that was Maurice Broaddus and Wayne Brady wanting to do Mother Abigail. And then in addition to Nat, there was one other author who kind of skirted the rules, but we won't spoil that story. But other than that, he was hands off. We sent him the finished manuscript, and I think Chris and I both thought, all right, we'll hear from him like a month from now when he's finished it, and maybe he'll give it a thumbs up, No, we started hearing from him the very next day, as he would read the stories. And that was a thrill, personally speaking. We didn't hear from him on every story, but every third or fourth story, he'd email us an update, and he was excited. He was exuberant. He was blown away by some of them. I've said to Chris before, I feel like in a way we gave him an opportunity to experience what his fans experience. He was just so freaking excited by some of them.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite part of that is, of course, it wasn't until we sent him the manuscript that the full weight of what we had done really sort of, sank in. And I was like, oh shit, what if he hates it? What if he's not happy? What if instead of honoring him, we've offended him? And I definitely was, all of a sudden, I was excited the whole time, having a great time, enjoying reading the stories. But as soon as we hit send on that email, I was just like, oh no, what have we done? And so getting his responses to these stories and having him actually be excited and really just enjoying reading them was the greatest thing ever. If we gave him back 1% of the experience that he's given us over the years, that would be the greatest thing ever. So,
well, I want to talk that's a good springboard into something I wanted to ask about, which is breaking this into sections the way you did and organizing it the way you did. It lends itself to anyone who's read The Stand knows the feeling of the rise and fall of the narrative, and the way that it pivots, and the way that you're able to tear the world down. And then there is this sense of endless possibility once Captain Trips has ravaged through the populace. And the anthology really replicates that quite well. I was reminded of my first time reading The Stand, and just that feeling of like, well, absolutely anything can happen now, and absolutely anything does happen now. And I just wanted to ask both of you as readers and as fans, do you have a favorite section of the Stand narrative? Like, what is your favorite? Because neither of you wrote stories that are in this anthology, which if I had edited this, I would have been like, no, I'm writing one too. Everybody get out of my way. I'm doing this. But you both were restrained enough to step away from that. Like, what is your favorite part of the Stand sandbox?
That's a great question. I think anybody who reads it for the first time, that Lincoln Tunnel scene is hard to beat. Something that I love, we should clarify. I have reread The Stand at least once a year, every year since the first time I read it, and I'm 7 years old. I can quote whole passages from that book from memory. I think now at my age, it's Glenn Bateman's death. I love that scene, but something that always sticks with me and I always linger over every time I read it is the sequence with the judge, when the judge is trying to sneak into Nevada. Just that whole sequence is just the tension and the suspense just builds and builds and builds to this eruption.
Weirdly, I have a few, and they're almost all kind of like that scene, Brian. They're almost all sort of individual moments. Lloyd in prison is just incredible. That whole sequence and Flag coming to him. Although at this point, I think it's not actually Flag; it's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Because I think that they're basically the same guy at this point. I mean, nobody wants 99 points, whatever percentage of Americans to die more than RFK Jr. does. But no, Lloyd in prison, Nick Andros behind bars, and the relationship he ends up having with the sheriff and his wife, and I love that stuff. I think the Nick by himself and then Nick traveling with Tom, that's some of my favorite stuff in the book. And then honestly, and Brian, I don't think I've admitted this yet, but the Trash Can Man is one of my all-time favorite fictional characters.
Really?
And even though the Trash Can Man is absolutely psychotic and perverted, where he grew up reminded me of where I grew up in some way. And I was like, I don't know, his story, like, yeah, I don't know. The Trash Can Man I was so excited when Matt Frewer was cast to play the Trash Can Man because I thought he was perfect, and he was.
This is why we do these interviews. 25 years I've known Chris. We've talked about The Stand countless times over beers.
Yeah.
I never knew that until now.
Yeah, well, because we usually are talking about the heroic characters, the characters on the right side of the mountains, right? But the Trash Can Man as a character is fascinating to me, because he's sort of like, he's broken and there's nobody around to fix him.
Right? Yeah, I think the older I get, the more I appreciate Trash Can Man. But if we're talking about villains, like I always had a soft spot for Nadine. I just found her so interesting in that she doesn't really come across as a fanatic. She comes across as more of a pragmatist, and I always enjoyed that angle of a survivor. But my favorite scene in the book, and this may be because I had the complete and uncut hardcover with those amazing Bernie Wrightson illustrations in them, but it's Mother Abigail and the Weasels. That for me was the moment in the book. I love the whole opening section of the book. I love the way that the world breaks down, and the Lincoln Tunnel scene and Nick in the sheriff's office and all that stuff. But those weasels, to me, it's a biblical scene. And that was what signaled to me that, like, okay, all bets are off now. Now that the world is reorganizing itself in this way, basically anything can happen, and it primes you for everything that's going to happen in those final confrontations in Vegas, which is amazing. I also wanted to talk, and we're spoiling The Stand. We're not going to spoil End of the World as we know it, but we're talking about all sorts of things in The Stand. This is something that I was really glad to see that King touched on in his introduction to your book, which is the new coda that he wrote for the recent television series, the stuff with Franny, because he talks about this in On Writing, that he got to the end of The Stand and he didn't really have a satisfying philosophical answer to Franny's question, which is, do you think people ever really learn anything? And I wrote about this when the show came out because I was fascinated by that episode and his willingness to, like, try to take it further. How do you both feel about A, the ending in the book, and B, the sort of expanded coda that King himself later added through the TV series?
I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just going to say I actually have not watched the modern Stand miniseries yet.
Okay, cool.
I watched part of the modern miniseries, but my wife, author Mary San Giovanni, wasn't feeling it, so I said, "All right, well, I'll watch it without you." And I just never got back around to doing that. Um, but for the novel, I mean, it fits my personal philosophy and my personal faith. Um, I don't know if that's where my personal philosophy came from, but I'm a big believer in the theory of eternal return, that things recur over and over again throughout time. Um, and that ending, life was such a wheel that no man could stand upon it for long, and in the end, it always came back around to the same place again. I mean, I believe that. That's my philosophy. Um, I think it answers Franny's question. Um, So, I'm not going to tell Steve his business, but I think he's wrong. I think he did have his philosophical ending right there. Um, yeah, I don't think we ever learn.
Well,
Um,
we've seen him delve into that philosophy throughout his career.
Oh
Through
yeah,
the
it's everywhere.
Power books, through so
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
did we learn from World War II? I don't know. I turned the news on and I'm not sure we did.
Mhm.
Um, I think things happen over and over again.
Well, yeah, I mean, Ka is a wheel, as the man himself said. Brian, you mentioned faith, and it knocked open a door in my head of in the introduction or the foreword to the complete and uncut edition, which I read over and over because I don't know about y'all, but when I first started reading King, I was hungry for the stories, but I was almost even hungrier to read his thoughts on the stories. And this was before I knew that on writing existed. So I was reading every afterword, every introduction, just any of just Steve talking to you. Because I wanted to know like what kind of mind did all this. And he called the book a tale of dark Christianity.
Mhm.
And Christianity obviously is a thing that recurs in King, and faith is a thing that obviously recurs in King. But The Stand, more than any other book of his, centers on faith in a really interesting way. And I think as a kid growing up in church, as I did, I'm not a Christian now, but I grew up in church, and so going to church and then reading The Stand, it shifted my worldview in ways that I don't know that I'll ever fully be able to articulate. It just had this profound impact on me. This idea that these people were putting their faith in each other just as much as they were putting their faith in some higher power, and in this weird way inventing a new faith. And I just wonder for each of you, like, what was the spiritual impact of a book like The Stand on your lives?
I don't know that it had a spiritual impact, but as a fan, my extended family were all Southern Baptists. My parents were Methodists. I grew up in a Methodist church. These days, I'm an agnostic. But as a horror fiction fan, you would always see the dark side. You'd see the devil in the Omen movies and William W. Johnstone's terrible zebra novels, and The Exorcist and all these properties, but you rarely saw the other side of the coin. I think Marvel had Jesus cameo in an issue of Ghost Rider, and that was about it. So, while a lot of friends of mine in middle school were groaning over the hand of God moment, I thought it felt true. Some Old Testament shit, but the biblical record says God would sometimes show up and do things like that. So for me, it worked. And as a horror fiction fan, it was like, all right, cool. It's nice to see somebody doing that.
I mean, I think you know, uh, if you believe in God, the times God's supposed to appear, are the times when we get his attention, right? So yes, I would think that if there's a God in this story, as soon as Captain Trips kills almost everybody on the planet, he's suddenly paying attention, right? But it makes sense that, like, when this is happening, that he's going to be involved, and so I love that part of the story. From my perspective, I grew up going to Catholic school for 12 years, which mostly taught me how to get away with shit. And I call myself now a Christian atheist, which means I don't believe that there's a God, but I do believe in the philosophy of Christianity that I was taught, in school. And, I feel like if we're looking at today's world, which in the context of reading The Stand and reading this anthology, it's very easy to plant all of the thought processes and plots and themes of the book into 2025. The people who are going to be on the Las Vegas side and going to be with Flag are a lot of the people who call themselves Christians now. The people who are going to be in Boulder are the people who actually behave like, Christians are supposed to behave. And I'm not saying that it would only be Christians, because I'm not a Christian, as I say, but it's about how you treat people, how you behave. And I love, Matthew, what you said is about these people are putting faith in each other. We all grew up with the saying, God helps those who help themselves, right? And so I think that's kind of my feeling about the book. But as far as your question about how did it impact me as a kid, I mean, when I started reading, I was reading books and stories, but I was also reading lots and lots of Marvel comics. And Marvel comics, my dad was not around. My parents were divorced when I was 11, but he was not really around that much to begin with. And, Marvel comics taught me how you're supposed to behave and what to expect from other people. So.
We could talk for a whole other episode about the morality of Marvel Comics. That's a fun topic. I just remember that Brian brought up the Hand of God scene, and I remember reading that in during like downtime in like AP English. I was sitting there reading The Stand, and I got to the Hand of God scene, and it was just, it kicked open a whole other section of my brain. It was just, you can do this.
Mm-hmm.
You can write a realistic contemporary novel with cars and cities and sickness and all that I recognize, and then you can just have God reach down and set off a nuclear warhead. Like, what on earth is happening? So I think
It's a new version of the Flood, right?
Yeah.
It's the Flood moment at the end of The Stand, for sure.
And the two of you touched on something, and I would love to ask Steve if he was aware of this or if it was subconscious. Talked about faith in each other. God doesn't show up in the book other than through Mother Abigail until they have that faith in each other. Glenn, Ralph, and Larry leave Stu behind, and they walk into Vegas hand in hand. And when Glenn is faced with this living embodiment of evil and injustice and fascism and everything else, he stands, and knowing full well what's going to happen to him, and he's quipping and being a smartass right up to the end. And then Larry and Ralph do the same, and that's when God shows up. Faith rewarded, I guess.
Yeah. Well, because they've surrendered. I mean, again, in the context of the book, they've surrendered themselves to the will of God.
Yep.
And it's a great moment. And I think that there's a common saying about when you're writing an ending, your ending you always try to strive for your ending to be both surprising and inevitable.
Yes.
And if you've read through the whole book, that moment is very surprising, but also it's inevitable. Like, if you go back after you got to it, you're like, of course this is what's going to happen.
Yeah. It's so good. I want to ask both of you about something that Brian touched on in his afterword to the book, and we've touched on a little bit already in this conversation, which is the way that the book is so vast that each time you read it, something sticks out for you more. And Brian touched on in his afterword the ways that aging and gaining new perspective as you age has changed his read of the book and the things that he cares about more now. Like I remember that whole section, the no great loss section of the novel, when you just read death after death after death after death. When I was young, it was the little boy who falls down in the well and is just lost there and eventually passes away. And now I think about the guy on the poker table trying to perform surgery on himself, and so my perspective shifts, and I just talked about the realization I had with Stu and the gas station and how I hadn't really thought about that before. So I wanted to ask both of you, how has your reading of the book changed as you've gotten older and as you've come to know the book better, and when you go back to it now, what sticks out to you that didn't hit you as hard when you were younger?
So quick two things for me. I mean, maybe the fourth time I read it, I think I've read it 5 times, not the 30 times or more that Brian has read it. What sticks out for me is that maybe the fourth time I read it, there's a moment at the very end where Stu and Franny are sitting on the hill and the children are playing and all of that stuff. And the kids are playing on Brentner Rock, named after Ralph Brentner. And when I got to that, I'd read the book 3 times previous. I cried. And I think that it was because when I was younger reading it, I didn't appreciate Ralph as much as a character, and the steadiness and the unquestioning stalwartness of him as a character, as a friend, as a person, like the kind of person you want in your community, in your corner. And then the other thing, Matthew, is you mentioned earlier, Nadine. I think when I was younger, I just was so rigid and black and white about good and bad. And I have so much sympathy for Nadine now as an adult that I didn't have for her when I was younger reading the book. Now, as a 58-year-old guy, I just am like, the moment when she tries to kind of like, she has that moment of pause, like maybe I don't have to go. Maybe if Larry will just love me, or if I have somebody who will, help me stand up, no pun intended, maybe I can not give myself over to this guy.
Yeah.
And I feel so much sympathy for her. And I didn't at all. I would be like, she was a villain as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, similar for me. Nadine and Harold both. I loathed both those characters as a kid and as a teenager and a young man. But with the perspective, the wisdom that comes with age, yeah, you can see, trauma shaped those characters into who they were, and it's almost like they were fated to go over to the dark side, and they both do get their redemption there at the end. So that is something that has changed over the years. I think the other thing for me is the supporting cast. When you're younger doing these read-throughs, you always focus on the main characters. And nowadays, every year when I reread it, I'll lock in on Joe or Lucy or Brett and Susan, or all these secondary characters that really flesh out that book, but you're not aware of it the first few times you're reading it.
Yeah. Yeah, Harold also, for me, I think that when, like I said, I was 15 or so when I read this, and Harold is a nerd who can't get girls, who is following this one girl that he's in love with across the country. And I think that my teenage self put up a wall around that and said, we're not going to talk about how similar we are to Harold. We're just going to ignore this. We're not a loser villain like Harold. I'm not going to think about this. And now, like, thinking about Harold, I'm so like, oh my God, I was Harold. Like, in a different life, I would be Harold. That absolutely hits so hard for me. Um, you mentioned the giant long list of writers when you first started planning this story out, and obviously you had to pare that down significantly for the finished book. Is there a world, another world than these, maybe, but is there a world where we get any kind of follow-up anthology to this one, or are you done, do you think?
Um, we would love to do all kinds of things. I don't think that we're going to be doing those. I think Steve is being very, not cautious. It's probably not the right word. He's being very thoughtful about what he wants to do, having opened the door to this. So, I don't want to say anything more about it, but yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I would love to do more. I'm sure Brian feels the same.
Would love to do more. But we were lucky enough to be able to do this, and
Absolutely.
that's enough.
Yeah. And it's honestly, like, it's a massive gift to us that he said yes. What an honor to be able to do it.
We can give your listeners an exclusive if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
He does. Steve mentions in the introduction, he was disappointed that Chris and I didn't write stories. That was by design that we chose to do that. There were so many people that couldn't get into the book. We didn't want to take up 2 more slots. Very limited on what we can say publicly. But I think Chris and myself are both individually getting a chance to play in the Stephen King universe. You'll have some details on that next year.
All right. I'm looking forward to it.
But that's
Whatever
all.
it is. As you were talking, like, it is interesting that this door has been opened, because it's very easy to imagine another book of this size that's just Overlook Hotel stories or Derry, Maine stories, which we're basically getting a TV show now about
Dark
Derry.
Tower stories.
Dark Tower stories, absolutely. Which I know that King has done his own. He's been playing around with that through Talisman 3, which I can't tell you how excited I am that we're actually getting Talisman 3. Yeah, so it's easy to imagine any number of corners of the Stephen King cosmos being fleshed out by dozens of writers over and over and over again. But like you said, I think like he is aware of his impact, and is sort of able to shepherd the legacy of these things. Without speaking for him, like, obviously we cannot speak for Mr. King. He is welcome to come on this podcast anytime he wants, by the way. Standing invitation. He can be here every week. Why do you think that this was the right time? Obvious, like, socio-political implications aside, why did it feel right that now we get an anthology about the Stand?
Dumb luck. I don't know what else to tell you. Brian?
I mean, Chris and I had previously done a similar anthology based around the works of Joe R. Lansdale,
Yes.
his trilogy of drive-in novels. I think some of it probably was, like Chris said at the beginning, it was the 2 of us presenting this idea to him. And not to toot our horns or sound arrogant, but I think there was probably an element of, all right, if I'm going to trust two people to do this, I think these guys are good candidates. Obviously the socio-political ramifications as well of the world we're living in now, and I'm not speaking for him. I'm just, these are just my own thoughts, but I would guess that you reach a certain age and you're still active, still doing what you love, but you probably do look back upon an incredible body of work. And you probably say, okay, what does this all mean? And I dare say that for those of us who are also lucky enough to be doing what we love and we're inspired wholly or in part by the stand, well, here's one thing that it means. You can open this book. This is what it means to us.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, this is going to be kind of a big, broad question, but I think that it's worth discussing as kind of a closer, which is, I think the three of us have demonstrated, and obviously the two of you have demonstrated with 36 other writers in this massive, amazing book, there is something special about The Stand, even given the massive cultural footprint of Stephen King and the entire body of work. Everyone that I have ever talked to who has read The Stand and loves The Stand has a special relationship with it. And maybe some of that is because we all got to the end of this 1100 page novel and now we want to talk about it to prove that we got to the end of it. But even considering stuff like The Dark Tower or The Shining or Salem's Lot, these things that are beloved, The Stand hits different. Like it has this imprint, this stamp that it leaves on our souls where we just want to share with other people. Like, oh, The Stand's my favorite book. Oh, it's my favorite book too. Oh my gosh. And I've encountered other people who aren't necessarily King fans who don't fully understand necessarily, like, what, oh, the Superflu book, that's your favorite book, and you go like, no, but there's so much more to it, and it's so expansive, and it's everything you love about Stephen King contained in one novel. We're now almost 50 years out from the original publication of this book, and now this anthology is here, and I'm sure that 3 years from now we'll be talking about the 50th anniversary of The Stand. I just want each of your perspectives on why this novel holds such a special place in the hearts of readers.
For me, pardon me, the highest compliment that I give when I blurb a book or review it is when I talk about how human something is. And there's nothing in The Stand is better than the humanity that King has written to every page, every character. It's about the human experience. It's about how we treat one another. It's about how we share the same world and what it means to be civilized or uncivilized. And to me, that's it. That's the final answer. And that's what I learned from it. Is humanity. I wholeheartedly believe that it's one of the greatest novels of the 20th century. And I thought you were going to ask about books that I would sort of compare it to, because there aren't, to get a book that has that kind of depth and experience and that you go along with and you close the book and you've been impacted that much by characters like this. And the only thing that I compare it to is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which is not a horror novel at all. It's extraordinary. But McMurtry's novel won the Pulitzer Prize. Why didn't The Stand? because it's a horror novel and it's a science fiction novel. It's whatever it is. So in any case, that's my answer. Humanity.
I would agree. I don't think there's any other literary work, regardless of genre, that encapsulates the late 20th century and sums it up better than The Stand. I think 100, 200 years from now, like we do now with Dickens, with Charles Dickens, I think scholars and readers, when they want to understand that era of America, they will read The Stand, and they won't read it as a horror novel or a science fiction novel. They'll read it as a novel.
Yeah, you can go back and read. I'm sorry to interrupt, Brian, but to that point, like you go back and read On the Beach by Neville Shute or Malival by Robert Merle. These stories that are about apocalypse, in one form or another. Nobody's talking about the fact that they're apocalyptic, or whatever. They're talking about what they meant as a story to the people who read it and all of that at the time. Sorry, continue.
No, you're right. I mean, yeah, and that's the thing. Apocalyptic fiction has always existed. I mean, you can go back to M.P. Shields' The Purple Cloud, which is sort of a precursor to The Stand, just several hundred years before. But yeah, The Stand really just captures 20th century America and all the people, the melting pot that made it up at the time, and what our fears were and our hopes were. I think it does it better than, like I said, any other form of media.
I think I would agree about that. It's anyway. We all love The Stand. Everyone in this conversation loves The Stand. If you're listening to this, you probably love The Stand too. The book is called The End of the World as We Know It: New Tales of Stephen King's The Stand. It is a worthy successor to the novel. It is in stores August 19th. Brian, Chris, before we let you go, I know you've got a lot of events coming up to promote this book. There's a big simultaneous launch event happening on the 19th. So will you let us know where people can find you online to keep up with all that stuff?
Yeah, I'm easy to find. BrianKeene.com. I know it's 2025, but I'm old, so I still use a website.
Same. I don't update mine nearly as often as I should, and I need to get on that. But ChristopherGolden.com. But I'm also easy to find on Blue Sky and Facebook and Instagram. And you're right, that August 19th event, I think it's 13 signings or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
3 countries, 35 authors, so check it out.
Yeah. We will put a link in the show notes to all of the events. And if you are in a city that is celebrating the release and has an author nearby to sign your book, go hit them up and get a copy of the book. Our guests have been Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Chris, Brian, thank you both so much for being on the show. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you,
Pleasure.
Matthew.
Thank you.
Thanks once again to Christopher Golden and Brian Keene for being on the show. The End of the World as We Know It: New Tales of Stephen King's The Stand is available August 19th. It's a banger. It's a must-have anthology for 2025. And of course, you can go follow Brian and Chris on their own social platforms by each of their books that they have written individually. And be on the lookout for whatever it was they teased in the interview about playing in the world of The Stand. I still don't know what that is, but I'm very, very excited to find out. So go follow them on socials so that you will know as soon as I know, because I am following them and I'm excited for that announcement. And of course, if you want to keep track of all of the things that we are doing, the best way to do that is to follow us on Blue Sky. We are at scareshapedus.bsky.social over there. That is where we are most active on social media. You will find new guest announcements over there, giveaways. Actually, if you're hearing this the day it goes up, we are doing a giveaway for a finished hardcover of The End of the World as We Know It. So if you're listening to this when it comes out, which I hope you are, go over to our Blue Sky account, like the post about the giveaway, and make sure you're following us, and you could win a finished hardcover of this amazing book. We are also on Facebook. We are The Scares That Shaped Us over there. Give us a like if you want to. We are also on YouTube. We're The Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube. If that is how you prefer to listen to your podcast, we have quite a few subscribers over there now, so apparently a lot of people do prefer that. Like, subscribe. You will get every episode of the show on your YouTube account if that is the way you prefer to listen. And of course, you can always email me if you have a recommendation, if you have something you'd like to hear me talk about on the show, a question that you'd like to hear me answer, any kind of mailbag stuff like that. I'm happy to get that kind of thing rolling if y'all are interested. We are Scares That Shaped Us podcast at gmail.com. Always happy to hear from everybody. And of course, if you like the show, tell your friends. Let everyone know about it. Head over to the podcasting app of your choice and leave us a 5-star review. That helps us get featured, which helps us get a bigger audience, which helps us get bigger and bigger guests. We've got some very cool stuff coming up, and I have sent out some pretty big requests to some pretty big people, and they may or may not happen, but the more listeners we have, the more likely they are to happen. So we appreciate any kind of support you can give us. We are coming up on our 1-year anniversary in a couple of weeks, which is wild to me. I've been doing the show that long. It has not felt that long because it's so much fun, but we will have some new stuff to announce around our 1-year anniversary show. So be sure you're following us on Blue Sky so you get all of those updates. That's it for us this week. We will be back next week with a brand new episode. Our guest will be Isabel Cañas. We're going to talk to Isabel about her amazing new novel, The Possession of Alba Diaz, and we're going to talk about the wonderful film The Others, starring Nicole Kidman, a great historical haunted house tale. Had a lot of fun talking to Isabel. That will drop Wednesday, August 20th at noon Central. So please be sure to keep an eye out for that. That's all for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.